There is a manila envelope on my kitchen table, the kind with the metal clasp that bites into your thumb when you try to open it. It sat there for 11 days before I touched it. I kept moving it to the counter, then back to the table, then under a stack of mail, as if the address on the front could change if I just stopped looking at it. It was from Michael's employer, HR department. And I already knew, the way you know things you can't afford to know yet, that whatever was inside that envelope was going to cost me something I hadn't finished grieving yet. I was right. But I had no idea that the thing it would cost me wasn't money. It was the story I'd been telling myself about the 6 weeks between my husband's funeral and the afternoon I finally sat down and opened it. That story had Sandra in it as the woman who saved me. What I found inside didn't just put her somewhere else. It put every single moment of those 6 weeks somewhere else. Every casserole, every phone call she made on my behalf, every time she smelled like lavender lotion and held me while I cried. All of it rearranged, permanently, into something I still don't have a clean word for. Michael and I met in our late 20s at a friend's cookout in Knoxville, the kind of July afternoon where the cicadas are so loud you have to lean in to hear someone, and I leaned in to hear Michael talking about the Tennessee River like it was a person he knew. He was an electrical engineer at a manufacturing company out on Strawberry Plains Pike. I taught junior English at Farragut High School. We were not a dramatic couple. We were a Tuesday night couple dinner at the kitchen table, kids doing homework, Michael watching a game with the volume low so I could read on the couch. 17 years. 2 kids, James, now 14, and Nora, 11. A house we'd paid down to something manageable. What I loved most about Michael, the thing I couldn't have told you at the time because I didn't have language for it yet, was the way he held space for quiet. He didn't perform happiness. He just showed up, consistently, at the kitchen table, at the school play, in the driveway at 6:15 on a Wednesday, and the consistency was the love. You don't know how much you've built your whole nervous system around a person's consistency until one Wednesday it stops. Sandra, his mother, lived 40 minutes away in Maryville, a small house on a street with a Methodist church on the corner, which she attended every Sunday and referenced constantly. She was 67, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who brings a casserole dish everywhere she goes and calls it love. She and Michael talked on the phone every Sunday evening, which I thought was sweet until the years added up, and I realized she called him always, and the calls ran long, and afterward Michael was often quiet in a way that had texture to it. I used to ask what they talked about, and he'd say, "Oh, just catching up," and I learned not to push. She was never unkind to me. That's the thing I want to be clear about because it matters to the story. Sandra never said a sharp word, never criticized my cooking or my parenting or the way I kept my house. She sent birthday cards with scripture inside. She called me honey and meant it warmly, or performed warmth so consistently that the distinction stopped mattering. The only thing I ever noticed, the one thing that pricked at something I couldn't name, was the way she handled papers. Documents, anything that required a signature or a decision. She would set them in front of Michael rather than in front of us, and if I reached for something, she would say, "Oh, I was just showing Michael," not rudely, just redirectingly, and Michael would take it, and I would go back to what I was doing, and Sandra would watch me go back to what I was doing, and there was something in that watching that I noticed and then immediately talked myself out of noticing. I told myself it was her generation. I filed it under not worth the conversation. I was wrong about the filing. Michael died on a Wednesday morning in October. He was 44 years old, a heart attack in the parking lot of his office building. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. James was in geometry class. Nora was at recess. I was in the middle of explaining dramatic irony to a room of 16-year-olds when my phone buzzed with an unknown number, and a woman's voice I didn't recognize told me to come to UT Medical Center, and I drove there not yet understanding that I was driving toward the rest of my life. Sandra was at my house before I got back from the hospital. I don't know who called her. She had a key we'd given her 1 year ago for emergencies, and she was in my kitchen when I walked in, and she held me for a long time, and she smelled like lavender lotion, and I was grateful. I was so purely and nakedly grateful that she was there, because I did not know how to be in my house without Michael in it. She stayed for 2 weeks. She slept in the guest room, she cooked, She handled the door when people came with food. She sat with the kids when they cried. She was, by every surface measure, exactly what a grieving family needed. And then, slowly, seamlessly, she started handling things. The first time it happened, I was sitting at the kitchen table on day 4, trying to read through a stack of paperwork benefit forms from Michael's company, a letter from the mortgage servicer, something from the county, and Sandra sat down across from me and said, "Donna, honey, you don't need to do all this right now. Let me take these and sort out what's urgent. You've got enough to carry." And I said yes. I said thank you, actually. I handed her the stack and went upstairs and lay down and fell asleep for 3 hours in the middle of the afternoon for the first time in my adult life. I thought it was a one-time thing. Over the next week and a half, Sandra made calls. She called Michael's HR department to ask about the benefits continuation timeline. She called the estate attorney whose card was on the refrigerator and spoke to him about the estate process. She called the bank to ask about the joint accounts and what documentation they'd need. She told me about each call after the fact, framed as updates. I spoke to Linda at HR, and she said the paperwork will come in about 3 weeks. And each time I nodded and said thank you because I was underwater, and Sandra was the only thing in the room that seemed to be moving with any coordination. Then, on day 9, a thick envelope arrived from Michael's HR department. I was in the kitchen when it came, and Sandra was there too, and she picked it up from the counter before I'd finished reading the return address. She turned it over, looked at the front, and set it back down but not in front of me. She set it at the end of the counter, between the fruit bowl and the wall, and said, "I'll go through that one later and flag what's time-sensitive." And I watched her move away from it, and I thought, that's the benefits summary, that should probably be mine to open. And then Nora came downstairs crying about something, and I went to Nora, and by the time I came back, the envelope was gone. Sandra had it in the guest room. She gave me a summary 2 days later. I never saw the original. I noticed, I said nothing. I told myself she was helping. The thing is, she was helping, technically. The summary was accurate. Everything she told me was true. That's what made it so easy to put back down. On day 12, I overheard Sandra on the phone in the hallway. I wasn't trying to listen, I was coming down the stairs and she didn't hear me. She was speaking in the same soft, measured voice she used for everything, and what I heard was, "Just want to make sure everything's in order before I head back. Is there anything still outstanding on Michael's file?" A pause. "Right, and that's all been processed." Another pause. "Good, thank you, Linda." She hung up. She turned and saw me on the stairs. She smiled and said, "Just following up with HR, making sure nothing falls through the cracks." And I said thank you. And I went to the kitchen. And I stood at the sink for a moment with both hands on the counter, and I thought, she just called HR to confirm something was processed. What? But Sandra came in behind me and asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes. And the question dissolved the way questions do when you're in the first 2 weeks of the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Looking back, that phone call was Sandra doing a final audit. I just didn't know yet what she was auditing. Michael's coworker Gary had been with him for 9 years. He was the one who'd been in the parking lot. He'd called the ambulance. He checked in every few days, not with casseroles and scripture, but with practical kindness. He'd dropped off a box of Michael's desk things, been careful about what he said and how he said it. When he called in week 3, he mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd received a forwarded email from HR, one of those accidental chains where someone replies, all, and he wasn't sure if it was anything, but he thought I should see it. He drove it over that evening in a printed envelope and handed it to me at the front door and said, "I might be wrong about what this means, but I thought you should have it." I put it on the kitchen table. Sandra had gone back to Maryville the day before. I looked at the envelope for a long time. Then I put it under the stack of mail. And here is the thing I want you to sit with for a moment, because I didn't understand it until much later. I put that envelope under the mail not because I forgot it, and not because I was too tired to open it. I put it there because some part of me already knew that what was inside it was going to change the shape of everything, including the 2 weeks I'd just survived, and I was not ready to have those 2 weeks taken from me yet. Sandra had been my only solid ground. I needed a few more days of believing in that ground before I let someone show me what was underneath it. I called Sandra on a Tuesday afternoon in December. James and Nora were at school. I had the printed emails and the beneficiary form on the table in front of me, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to feel their weight while I talked to her. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Donna, honey, how are the kids doing?" I said, "I need to ask you something, Sandra, and I need you to be straight with me." There was a small pause, not long. "Of course," she said. "Did you know about the beneficiary designation on Michael's life insurance policy?" "His, you mean the policy through work?" "Yes, the one where you're listed as a 50% beneficiary." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and warm and completely controlled. "Donna, that was something Michael set up years ago when he was first starting out. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of if something happened to him. I think he did it before you two were even engaged." "That's not what I'm asking, Sandra. I'm asking if you knew about it when he died." "I knew it existed. He'd mentioned it at some point over the years." "And did you know he was planning to change it?" The pause this time was longer. "I knew Michael was thinking about updating some of his paperwork. Yes." "Then I need you to explain to me why, 2 months before he died, you were emailing his HR department asking whether a beneficiary change required the existing beneficiary's signature." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. When Sandra spoke, her voice had not changed register, still soft, still warm, still Sunday morning measured, but something underneath it had gone very still. "I was trying to understand the process so I could help walk Michael through it if he asked me to." "He didn't ask you to." "I was anticipating, Donna. That's what I do. I try to be one step ahead so the people I love aren't burdened. I've always done that. I did it for Michael his whole life. I did it for you these past 2 months." A small pause. "I would think you'd know that about me by now." And there it was, the pivot. She wasn't just explaining the August emails. She was reaching back across the entire 2 weeks in my house and relabeling them. Not surveillance, but love. Not a woman checking the clock on her inheritance, but a mother who anticipates, who prepares, who carries things so others don't have to. The same gesture she'd been performing for 2 months, offered back to me now as its own defense. "Sandra," I said, "I have the email chain, the whole thread. Gary gave it to me." A silence. Then, quietly, "And I want you to hear the precision in this, because it was exact," she said. "Gary should mind his own business." Not a denial, not an explanation. Gary should mind his own business. It was the first true thing she'd said in the entire conversation, and it told me everything the rest of the call hadn't. "I'm going to consult an attorney," I said. "I've already spoken to one, and I understand the designation is legally binding. I'm telling you so you know where I stand." "Donna, I also want you to know I've made copies of everything." A very long pause. Then, in the softest voice she had, "I hope you know that none of what I did was meant to hurt you." I was standing at the kitchen table. I put one hand flat on the beneficiary form on my name, printed next to hers, 50% each. I could smell from somewhere the ghost of lavender lotion. Whether it was real or memory, I couldn't tell you. "I know that's what you hope," I said, and I hung up. If this story made you think of someone, share it with them. And while you're at it, go check your beneficiary forms tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. Subscribe if you're new. There's a lot more where this came from. The estate attorney I'd consulted confirmed what I already knew. The beneficiary designation was valid, properly executed, and there was no legal mechanism to contest it based on intent alone. Michael had meant to change it. He hadn't. The law does not adjudicate intention. $240,000 was Sandra's, and there was nothing I could do about it that wouldn't cost more in legal fees than I stood to recover. What I could do, and did, was this. I contacted Michael's HR department directly and established myself as the sole point of contact for all ongoing benefit matters. I requested that any future inquiries from external parties be flagged and reported to me. I hired a financial advisor named Patris, who came recommended by a colleague at school, and I restructured the payout into concrete goals: the mortgage, a college fund for each kid, and a 12-month emergency cushion. I called my own insurance agent and spent one full afternoon updating every policy, every beneficiary designation, every account with a transfer on death option. I did it in a single sitting, and I sat there afterward feeling something that wasn't quite power but was in the same neighborhood. Now about Michael. I spent a long time in the early months of that winter trying to decide what I believed about him, not about what he knew, about what I was going to do with not knowing. Because that's the actual question. When someone dies and leaves behind an ambiguity this size, you don't get resolution, you get a choice about how to carry the uncertainty. I chose this. I believe Michael was a good man who ran out of time. I believe he loved me. I believe he intended to update the policy, and that intention was real, even though real intentions and completed paperwork are not the same thing. And the difference between them is exactly what Sandra understood and Michael didn't. I chose to let his love be true and his failure be human, because the alternative, spending the rest of my life in a marriage I can't verify, is not a life I'm willing to live. That's not absolution. That's a decision. There's a difference, and the difference matters to me. What I did with that decision was put it somewhere I could find it. I wrote it in the back of the journal I'd been keeping since October, not as a conclusion but as a position. Something I could return to when the doubt came back, which it did, and which it still does, and which I expect it always will. I wrote, he meant to, he didn't. Both of those things are true. And I wrote it in the same notebook where, 2 pages earlier, I'd written down the account numbers and policy numbers and beneficiary names for every financial instrument I now own. Because love is also the paperwork, and the paperwork is also mine. Sandra called twice in January. I didn't answer. She sent a card in February, one of those religious ones, a verse from Romans about patience. I put it in the drawer with the printed emails. She has not contacted me since March. There is a manila envelope on my kitchen table. A different one now. This one contains the updated beneficiary forms for my own life insurance policy, signed and ready to send. James and Nora, 50% each. No co-beneficiaries. No one else in the frame. I've taped it to the front door so it actually gets mailed tomorrow, because I know myself well enough to know that an envelope on the kitchen table can sit there for 11 days if I let it. The difference between this envelope and the last one is that I know exactly what's inside it. I put it there myself. Update your beneficiary designations. Not someday. Not when you get around to it. Tonight, if you're with your partner, ask to see the forms. Ask specifically. Look at the names. Not because you distrust anyone. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's the paperwork you do while you still have time. And time, as it turns out, is the one thing nobody's mother-in-law can audit in advance.